welcome to another provocative episode of Taboo Talks, a safe space for free-flowing and meaningful conversations on topics that many people prefer to shy away from. I'm Drea Renault. Tonight's topic is deeply personal for me, so much so that it took me some time to mentally prepare, as I have never publicly spoken on the matter before. If there were ever a topic that I found difficult to discuss, aka taboo, it would be this one. Facing the loss of a loved one is naturally difficult, but losing someone by suicide adds another level of pain to an already trying grieving process. The shock and anguish following a suicide is overwhelming. You are faced not only with the mourning of a loved one's passing, but you're also wrestling with a host of conflicting emotions like anger, shame, and guilt, while still struggling to come to terms with the nature of your loved one's death. The stigma associated with mental illness and suicide is often perpetuated by social behaviors like stereotyping and avoidance. Out of the many damning narratives, the notion that those that kill themselves are cowards or selfish might be the worst. We also label suicide attempters as attention seekers who are not to be taken seriously because if they really were suicidal, then they just do it. Then there is the belief that suicidal tendencies run in the family, a torturous idea for many families who have experienced a suicidal death. And finally, we must question the reasoning that it is better not to talk about the act of suicide so as to not encourage any ideations of it. Providing support and help for those dealing with mental health issues is not easy. Sure, there are mental health awareness campaigns and well-intentioned, albeit often misguided intervention causes, but for someone that's been there is a stark lack of general understanding about the conflict of mortality that suicide attempt and suicide loss survivors face. Tonight, we will try our best to discuss the stigma surrounding suicide and mental health, exploring what it's like to live with a mental health disorder and what it means to understand and support those battling these challenges. I have some very special panelists with me tonight to help me through this episode because it's a tough one. Please introduce yourselves and thank you so much for being here today. I'm gonna start with this lovely lady in leopard print over here.
Hi, my name is Starla Bradley. I'm a social worker, a mother of 3. And 21 years ago, I lost my dad to suicide.
Thank you, Starla.
Hello, I'm Dr. Shanika Arnold. I'm a registered general practitioner and I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder after many years of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideations.
Thank you, Shan.
I'm Alexander Evans. I'm a musician, and 5 years ago I was diagnosed with dysthymia, and I have struggled with depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation as well.
My name is Martine King. I'm a mental health practitioner. I'm very passionate about talking about mental health in real and useful ways.
Thank you so much for that, guys. That was great. I know that was a little it's always difficult to introduce yourself. But the first question I'm going to ask straight out the gate is something that you already started, Starla, and it's tell us a little bit about yourselves and your struggles with mental illness. So I guess I will start with you, Alex, if you don't mind.
Okay. As I mentioned before, I was diagnosed in 2017 with dysthymia. At the time, I was pursuing my degree in music at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago. And the diagnosis came about as a result of experiencing heightened spells of depression, heightened anxiety, and I went to the therapist on campus provided by the school, and that was my diagnosis. And I continued therapy, and I was put on antidepressants, which I was on for about 15 months or so. And throughout the process and everything, I also came to develop a greater understanding of what all of it means, you know, what depression is, what anxiety is, and was able to realize that it's something that I had been dealing with for years, for probably the majority of my adult life.
Do you find that it was helpful naming and like getting that diagnosis?
Absolutely, yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Like, how about you, Shanika?
So, I mean, definitely putting a name to it helps the problem. My journey took a little bit longer, and that I think actually had a lot to do with the fact that I am a doctor. And prior to going into medical school, I have a bachelor's degree in biology with a minor in psychology. So I have a history of psychology background, and you quickly learn from just reading and having to deal with other people how to suppress some of these behaviors in public. So during med school, the depression came out, the anxiety came out, but when I did go to counseling at that point in time, we thought, oh, you're a medical student, it's high pressure, and that's kind of what we labeled it, and we were focused, my counseling at that point in time was primarily focused on coping with school and not necessarily digging deeper into the problem. And then as a fourth-year medical student is when I first met my first borderline personality disorder patient when I did my psychiatric rotation. And she was in a tumultuous relationship. The person had left and she came into hospital because she was cutting. And when I saw this person, I saw myself. It's like I could read off all the symptoms at that point in time, but I couldn't admit it to myself. I was a medical student. I needed to finish. My career came first. My goals came first. And so I put all of that on the back burner, and I actually learned how to not be borderline in public, which made, when everything finally unraveled for me later on as I was working as a doctor, it was much more difficult to accept. But luckily I had a wonderful psychiatrist who was like, this is not your fault, you know, and we really went back, and she took the time to go back into even days of high school and sixth form and to really uncover so much of what was going on. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel guilty for having depression, for having anxiety, and later for having borderline personality disorder.
Right. It's like something is wrong with you,
Yes.
you know, but then when somebody takes the time to tell you, no, it's an illness, you know, a lot of people suffer from it. This is what it is. These are the symptoms. This is the DSM categorization for it, right? It almost makes you feel a little better, right? Like you're not alone, like you're not the only one.
And the difficult thing for me is that I've actually, being in medicine too, I've actually avoided or intentionally avoided taking medication, which is really, really bad. I was on antidepressants for a while. They made me very foggy, and it made it very difficult for me to work and function. And one of the things that had both been helpful but also my downfall is that I tend to put my patients first. So once I'm focused on my patients, then it takes me out of my own head, which is helpful, but it also is an avoidance of the issue.
Right.
So when I do leave work and I go home, then I fall into that. It's like this almost a gaping hole of nothingness that, you know, I couldn't figure out who I was when I'm not a doctor. And so that made it very, very difficult for me. But I'm not currently on medication, and part of that is because for me, not that I don't believe in it, I do think it's very helpful, but it's more the fear of what other people will think, knowing that I am on medication for this.
Right.
I was recently in a car accident, and the police officer, the first thing was, oh, you're on medication, because they had known my story before that. And I had said, no, I am not under the influence of anything. I'm not on medication. I do CBD, cognitive behavioral therapy, and that is how I've managed my disorder.
Right. Thank you for sharing that, because it must be a difficult thing for sure. You know what I mean? Because I want to talk about, Starla maybe can help me out here. I want to talk about that guilt that you were talking about, that is associated with mental illness, especially when it comes to like death by suicide, right? Why is there such a social stigma surrounding this topic is my question. Why do you, and I think I might direct it at you first as somebody that experienced it, and then I'll ask Martine to elaborate.
I think just having dealt with the issue of suicide for the past 22 years, this happened at a time when, even more so, it was even more taboo back then. And especially for men, big men don't cry.
Right.
Men don't cry, you don't show
cry,
emotion.
right.
And when you put those pieces together in terms of, how men are portrayed or how they're expected to behave, along with people not understanding mental illness, you have that the situation that it creates is even more impossible for somebody who is struggling with mental illness to seek help. And
Right.
I think that's what happened with my dad. And I have to say, I've only learned a lot of what I know in retrospect. It's usually the case with suicide, right? You put the pieces together in retrospect, and for him, he was my age now. I'm 44 years old, and he was 44 at the time. He was at the height of his business career, and he was a very prominent member of the Belmopan Society. And for me, I had never experienced any type of loss before.
Right.
And this was the first. And I'm telling you that the hit, it's not even a curveball. I think it throws you off your feet. It knocks you
Right.
down completely. It takes the wind out of you.
Chest, 100%, yeah.
And it's not just for a period of time, it's for years. But he didn't tell anybody. And in retrospect, we put pieces together. We knew he was grieving. He had recently lost his stepfather, my grandfather. And I think grief and in thinking back years of dealing with anxiety was the trigger, that grief from losing his dad, because his dad died in September. And he killed himself in February, 5 months.
Right.
And it's within that space of time he started to lose weight. He stopped eating. He was, but he never expressed to anybody that, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling. We were worried about him. But he never, ever, and I think that's one of the struggles for me, Why didn't he say anything? I wish he would have told us.
Yeah.
This could have been prevented. We could have gotten him help. But society makes it harder. Because I'll tell you, after he died, the types of rumors that started swarming, the obia, something,
Poison.
something. It couldn't be that he was simply, and when I look back, it's textbook depression leading to major depression, leading to suicide,
Right.
But no, it was my mom who did it. I mean, people were cruel.
Right.
Cruel.
So
And-
did you felt that shame that
Yes.
it's like a public, and I can only speak for myself, like it almost gives you the attention that you never asked for. Like, why all of a sudden everybody to watch me? Like, I don't know what happened. Like, this happened to this person. Like,
Yes.
you to ask me for like answers. I don't know. Like, maybe they did obia, him or her. You know what I mean? I don't know. So I want to ask you a little bit more about those feelings of like guilt and shame, because that's something that I resonate with completely.
I think, and I was sharing a bit earlier, even up to now, 22 years later, people still come up to me and they would be like, I know your dad, and oh man, I can't believe he did that. And, sometimes I would be taken aback. But over the years, you know, I've learned how to deal with it. Yes, that happened, but we've survived that. I wish he would have, you know, things would have been different for him to be here with us still, you know. But for me, over time, I think it does get better. For many years, I wasn't even able to say it. Just somebody looking at me, and I would break down in tears. And the hardest part was, within that same year after he died, I went off to grad school. And I think losing him really solidified the fact that I needed more. I had only my bachelor's in social work, and I was a school counselor. But after he died, I went to do my master's in clinical social work. And I purposefully took a class on theory and treatment of suicidology. And my God, that was the hardest class. It was the hardest class, but I needed to understand. Right? Because people had all their theories, even within the family. And I think for years, you know, I've had to, even within the family, dispel myths. Like, no, that's not how it works, you know. Because we've heard it all. You know, they're selfish and the whole thing. And I've come to a place where I can empathize. And I feel sad to know that he was in so much pain.
And is still being persecuted even after the fact.
Because, you know, one of the worst things, he's not in heaven. People who are killing themselves, they forever suffer in some type of purgatory.
I have to put down my wine for that one.
You know, you hear a lot.
Well, so like you said, the judgment continues.
Yes, even after.
So.
And it takes me back to where the stigma really comes from, Martine. Do you think it really just comes from the not knowing what it is, like the ignorance?
Fair.
Yeah?
I mean, even for me, there is, and I think that fear, I oftentimes feel professionally and personally, I could feel an anger build within me because the statistics are so alarming. But behind that anger is fear. And even the looks that you talk about, that's, we don't always know how. We know there's empathy, maybe even some for pity and sympathy. But because we're so afraid and we continue to act on that fear, we don't know what to do. And we come off rude or we come off insensitive, you know, or people think that they're, you know, they're trying to be supportive, but they don't know how because we're clouded by this fear. And we try, as human beings, the brain operates in a way that to navigate life and all the information we have, we put it into categories, but we just don't seem to quite understand. This now makes sense. How do you make sense of this? Because from we're born, we fight to stay alive. So how does it make sense that now someone or I want to take my life? It doesn't quite fit. But I'm with you. Someone who gets to that point, and you guys know this better than any of us sitting here, it's the pain is intense and it breaks my heart whenever I hear it. And the first thing I think is what suffering that person must have endured to have gotten him or her, and I get goosebumps, to that point where that was the only option, you know? It's deep, it's not cowardly, it's not anything like that. But the fear, again, the stigma comes from that fear because we don't quite know what it's about, and then we're too afraid to delve because then suppose that happened to me, or suppose that means that if, and I always say the word suicide, 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 say it over and over. It's not gonna make someone necessarily say, okay, I'm going to do it. No, you know, it might actually help. But fear is the biggest factor. And from fear and lack of information and understanding comes judgment.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to ask the very obvious question, and I think maybe I could answer it, but I know, maybe my thinking of it, you know, is biased. But actually not really, because I have experienced normal grief, like loss of, you know, a parent through normal, like natural, let's say natural circumstances. And I've also experienced, you know, death by suicide. And the difference between the two, I really would say, is the unknowing of one, right? So, for example, and I feel like I have time for my Kai share, because that was like the consensus before we start the show that I have to share too. So my father died of cancer, right? He was already, you know, along in his years. So it was something that there was a lead up to it, you know? So it's almost like you expected it. The deterioration of a body is difficult to see, like, you know, because you're pre-planning, you know, a demise. So there is, you know, that grieving before they,
Grief,
right.
yeah.
When it comes to now death by suicide, it's almost like you said, like it takes the air out of your chest, because in no way, shape, or form would you even imagine that this would happen just like this and as suddenly as these things tend to happen, right? Even when there is a lead up, like you said, with, you know, your father losing weight and exhibiting these symptoms of depression, there is still a form of denial or of blockage, you know, to the actual problem that happens, and you are still startled when it finally does happen. So I want to ask the question, maybe Martine can help me. People going through, let's say, post-suicide grief management, do you handle that differently than you would handle normal grief?
Well, it can be referred to as complicated grief because, again, as you explained just now, there is a natural sense of how the grieving process goes, and definitely the additional, the shame, the guilt, that sense as well that often comes is, was I not enough? That complicates the grieving process. So yes, in a general way, you could look at there are stages of grief. So you could say, yes, they apply here. But there's a whole other level here of understanding and trying to come to terms with that you would not, there's a level of it in for lack of a better word, normal grief, but they're different layers. So that dealing with the shame that comes from the stigma, dealing with, especially as children, we grow up thinking a parent will do anything for a child. So when you didn't live for me, that then could mean, oh, something was wrong with me, or I wasn't good enough. And that's where, when the grief comes from another source, you may not deal with that. You understand that your father was sick, and so, you know, at some point, as hard as it is, it's going to come. Even if it's an accident, you recognize, okay, you know what, there was a car accident and this happens. But so it is definitely considered complicated grief because there are other layers there that you need to work through in terms of your worth and your value. And then, did I miss it? I never see it. Oh my God, it did say something, but I'm thinking to talk. You know, or maybe, you know, so you
feel like you could have done something to prevent.
And it's really difficult to not take it personally.
Yeah.
You know?
For sure.
Yeah. I think the thing that I've struggled with over the years, and I'm at a very different place now, but it was the issue of just not knowing why. I think the question I kept asking for many, many years was, why? Like, what was he thinking? What was he going through? Why? That was the biggest question I had.
And can I just add, and I think maybe that's a part of the complicated grief, because that too, you will never ever fully know that, you know?
Yeah.
And that can happen in any type of grief, but this death by suicide is in particular the why, you know, because again, we're trying to understand. If I could just make some sense of this, then maybe something will click and I'll be like, okay.
Yeah.
Acceptance comes easier if we understand, but if we don't understand, then we're just left with this.
Right.
Why?
Yeah. I think my next question is for Alex and Shanika. You've expressed that you've experienced ideations before, and you've been in that state of, you know, lowness where this is something that you're very much contemplating. I think maybe, you know, you could help us understand what that feels like.
So I think that one of the things that I've come to understand particularly about depression, is that it doesn't always look the same. You know, for some people, they can't sleep. Some people, all they could do is sleep. Some people can't eat. Some people overindulge. So, you know, but having had my experience and having spoken to a good number of people who have had, you know, their experiences, one of the things that I think can be not accurate sometimes is having depression being described as intense sadness. When, for me, this sadness or that part of it was never the worst part of it. I think the two worst parts of it for me were, one, the anhedonia, which is
The void, the
just
nothing.
not being able to enjoy anything.
Yeah.
You know, and that was particularly difficult for me because even during a point in my life when I was graduating from school and I was winning all of these awards and I was playing all of these sports for UE and getting to travel to Barbados and to Jamaica and representing Belize at Carifesta and having all of these amazing things happening in my life and not being able to enjoy any of it, feeling so empty, feeling like moments that should have, well, let me not use the word should, but moments that under ideal circumstances could have been some of the best moments of my life, I was completely dissociated and completely detached and just trying to survive them. And the second thing is that feeling of hopelessness.
Yeah.
There's that feeling that it's not just like a darkness, it's kind of like almost like internalizing the belief that there can never be light again. And I think those two things, when my experience, when it was at its worst, I think those were the most difficult things. And one of the things that you touched on as well is, especially like, you know, as men, it's something that we're socialized to not talk about our feelings. And you know, I'm sure Martine could correct me on the exact statistics, but you know.
I'll be happy to tell you right now. Because this also pisses me off. Go ahead.
But you know, suicide is about at least two times more prevalent in men than in women. And I think a lot of that, you know, comes down to how we're socialized. One of my favorite quotes from the late intersectional feminist icon Bell Hooks is that the first act of violence that the patriarchy demands of men is violence against self. It is the emotional self-mutilation of ripping away our right and our ability to feel from ourselves. And she also goes on to say that if we fail to do that, the other men around us do it, because then we get things like, you know, what, you're soft? You know, like that is the response to it.
Yeah.
So, and that's also kind of like one of the reasons why I also try especially to reach out, or I'm receptive to like other men reaching out to talk about wellness, to talk about mental health, because I understand that we don't live in a society where that kind of thing is perceived as okay.
Yeah, for sure.
If I can add, I was really happy. I mean, I am happy that you're here, because absolutely,
Yes.
all of you guys, you know, the courage it takes to be here, but particularly to see you here as a guy, because definitely our men are in serious trouble, you know, or women as well, but definitely men with suicide. The rate is, you know, more than double that of women, and of course the methods are more lethal. And that is because we have not socialized their boys to be able to talk about their emotions. And I also want to say, you know, I think that's changing slowly, but I want to say to the women as well that we have a responsibility, because we can be just as judgmental on our men with that internal thing than the men already are, because they grew up that way.
Yeah.
But I always say, I'm not trying to make a man a woman, but a man is a human and a woman is a human, and they have emotions. And so women tend to be more expressive. We use more words. We do have our differences, but that men are not limited. Only through socialization are they limited to their emotional expression. So we as women, as mothers, as partners, as co-workers, play a huge role in squashing all those antiquated, you know, the many explicits we could say that men have to deal with when it comes to emotional expression.
For sure. Let's hold that thought. We will take a short commercial break and we'll be right back.
If you or someone you know is struggling with suicidal thoughts, please call 227-5354 or 911.
Welcome back to Taboo Talks. I'm your host, Drea. This evening, we are discussing suicide and mental illness. In this segment, we will dive a little deeper into the subject, touching on some questions I'm sure will be tough, but important in understanding more of what people are going through. The first question is directed at myself, and it's really to share the relationship that I had with my loved one that died by suicide, and what they were like. So this is actually very difficult for me because, like I shared before, I don't really talk about it. Like I really honestly don't. Even though I feel sometimes obligated to, or like you mentioned before, people just come up to you like, oh, I knew your dad. Like, I can't believe, you know. I get a lot like when people come up to me like, oh my gosh, like I remember your mom. She was such a wonderful lady. She was so giving because she was very charitable, generous, very helping, very much a fashionable lady. So I feel like I can say I got it from my mama, and it was difficult for people to assimilate why somebody is so smiley and full of life, because that's how everybody describes you. Oh, he was so full of life, right? Would do something like that. And I want to go back to what Martine said. It's something that I will never know myself. I did not know that anything was even occurring with her mental state until maybe a few weeks before it happened. And by a few weeks, I mean like maybe 2.5 or 3. And leading up to, her final attempt, because I was made aware of what was happening through an attempt, right? I got a phone call. I was literally busying myself, like living my normal life. I wasn't at work. I was doing something or the other, and I got a phone call from my stepfather and said, hey, have you seen your mother? I said, no. Actually, come to think of it, she didn't pass by today because, fun fact, I am a well-grown woman, but because she wants me to have a healthy diet, because she was that type of person, like, you have to have a balanced diet, she usually would, like, bring me lunch to work. Like, I was one of those people. Like, you know what I mean? She would bring me my healthy lunch to work. And I said to him, like, she actually didn't even, like, bring me my lunch. Like, selfishly, like, she didn't even bring me lunch and eat yet, like, and at 3 o'clock. And come to find out that she, had had an episode that day and had disappeared all day. And then it was me dropping everything. I said, okay, I'd come. And on my way to her house, I found her car in a ditch around the corner of our house. And I found her in the car. So I found her in the car, like visibly, visibly, like how I would say, out of sorts, yeah. And I realized that she was under the influence of prescription medication because she had just attempted to drown herself, whilst under the influence, so she didn't, Anyway, and I say this openly with regard for my family members that maybe wouldn't want me to say this. Like, for example, I'm not the only one that this has happened to. And like you said earlier, it's something that I don't feel like I should share, or like, I have that feeling of I don't need to say this because it didn't happen to me. But it did happen to me. Yeah. It happened to me. So looking back, I saw a quick unraveling of a very tightly kept gift wrapping, if I want to use that analogy. Like you were saying before, like I had no idea. Like, I was living my life. I saw her almost every day, every other day. I had no idea until this first incident. And that's what prompted me to actually, I went back to my mom's house. I was living there, and we were suicide proofing everything. And, we started making plans, and I found out that she was on prescription for, I don't know, how long for you. She was on antidepressants. She was on anti-anxiety medication. I had no idea, like complete like curveball. I did not know. So when people ask me why, if I know, like, you know what I mean? I have no idea. It's only in retrospect that I can see certain signs of things, even as, you know, I would describe her behaviors throughout my childhood and my, you know, personal development, that I could recognize that my mother was histrionic and she suffered a schizophrenic episode, you know. She was going through something very much by herself without any of us knowing. And what ended up happening was, you know, very quick, I want to say, demise. Yeah, it was a quick unraveling. And I, till this day, have a lot of guilt when it comes to that, because shouldn't I have noticed these things? I also have a background in psychology, you know. Shouldn't I have been the one? I'm the one that spent most time with her. I spoke to her the most, you know. Shouldn't I have known? Shouldn't I have done these things? And we tried. I mean, it's not like we didn't, you know, we did not do anything. But it takes me back to the not talking about it, because I think one of the biggest reasons we didn't catch it earlier was because she was very much, I don't want to talk about this type of person. And if she did, it would come off as like, oh, I'm just going through my menopause, I'm crying, you know, like she would mask it as like I'm being emotional, like this month, my hormones, like, you know, because we're women and we're sensitive, so we could openly cry about things, you know, because if I want to say she was always an emotional person, which is why I feel like I'm not, or I tend to come off as colder. But it was, to say the least, the worst thing that has ever happened to me, because I witnessed every attempt. It was 3 attempts before, and I was the one that found her, you know, and I was the one to help cut her down. So, and I was the one to call everybody. I was the one to call my sister. I had to be the one, because I had to be the one. That's just what it was, you know.
It unfolded.
Yeah.
Can I ask, like 3 years later, I mean, what in terms of the guilt and the shame in particular, just because I'm sure there are many other emotions, but what is it like 3 years later?
I think I would say that I internalize it to the point where I can talk about it without being emotional. But, for example, leading up to this episode, I knew that there was a point in time where I had to be open about it at some time, like some point in my life, because it was a very public thing. The moment it happened, and that was the thing that I was so upset about. The moment it happened, you know, you call the dispatcher, they send somebody special over, because basically it's a murder, but a murder by the same person. You know what I mean? So they send a detective, they start to ask you all kind of fool questions, and you're like literally trying to like still do CPR, like try to live it, like, no, you're not dead. You know what I mean? You're still trying to like process the fact that
This can't be.
this carcass or this body right here is dead, you know? And used to be my mother or my father or whatever. So 3 years later, I feel like I have all of those visuals and all of those memories, and they pop up from time to time, but I see them as if like it's a movie. Like I see
Happened to somebody
like I
else.
not see it like it happened to me. I see it outside. Like when I visualize it, I see myself, and I see, because it was myself. I found her, then my stepfather like helped me cut her down, and then we had to walk around the veranda to pick her up. But I see it happening outside of myself. I don't see me in it, so I dissociate. You know. But I think the heaviest thing that you carry with yourself is that guilt, because all I kept thinking about was, I came here, I baby proofed, I like suicide proofed everything. Basically, it's baby proofing. You put up knife, you put up anything, any sharp object, any medicine, any bottle, any sharp, anything where you could broke, you like literally like you put it up. And what had happened was that she was saving pillowcases. That's how she did it. She was saving pillowcases, and in the middle of the night, she created her makeshift noose, you know? And it was so crazy to see how much detail she went into to hide what it was that she was doing. That's like the alarming part to me. She even had on multiple layers of clothing for some reason, I don't know. I guess she was thinking like, you know, to brunt the fall or to protect herself from, I don't know what it was.
So the intent was there,
Yeah,
was
like
planned, and
she 100% planned. She knew that I was there, and she knew that I would fall asleep at a certain time. She knew that she had a certain window. She knew where she hid everything. Like, she had planned that to a T. You know what I mean? Because we had taken away everything else that she had been using. So I think grief is something that you don't get over or through. You just live with it. Like, you just learn
make
to
adjustments
live with
to
it.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So when somebody say, oh, like, what's your healing process like? What do you mean? Like, you know, I just live my day like, you know, day to day. Like, it just so happens that, you know, I'm one of those people that has had to experience trauma so much in their life, because it's just the card that you sometimes are dealt, you know?
Yeah. I'm just thinking about your experience and the fact that, you know, Martine was sharing that, you know, complicated grief.
Yeah.
The dimensions, the added dimensions that losing someone to suicide brings. But I'm thinking about your experience as opposed to mine, and I'm thinking it was even more traumatic for you, having to have found your loved one, to see them, to deal with them. And I can tell you that it has affected each of my family members so very differently. Because it was my mom and my little brother who were there at the time. Because he got up one morning and he went into the bathroom, the adjoining bathroom, and he locked the door. And he had his shotgun, licensed weapon, but he went into the bathroom and he put it inside his mouth and he pulled the trigger. So all my mom and my little brother heard was this loud bang, right? And my oldest brother was there first. Like, they lived in Belmont and I was in Belize City at the time. I was working, and I would just go home every weekend, right? So my eldest brother was there right after, you know, with trying to open the door when they were calling the police. You know, he was there when they actually got the door open. They were there. They saw my dad in that state, in that condition. And
it's like the details of the goriness. Like, I want to, sorry to interject, but it's the details that really stay with you. You know what I mean?
And the way how it affected him, especially. That day, I mean, it changed all of our lives, but he never, like, his coping, wow, like, just his entire life, he struggled. He struggled with addiction. He struggled with a whole lot. My younger brother, I think he still has insomnia sometimes. You know, and I think it's because of how that incident affected them. My little brother was, you know, very young at that time. He was only about 10, and he heard it.
You know, we now know through trauma, trauma can, especially at the younger ages, can be stored in the cells, and the cells actually grow with that. And especially 22 years ago, there was the idea, well, and I don't know if this was the case in your family, but the idea of, we're not talk about it, when what you really want to do as soon as a trauma happens, you know, it could be as short as 72 hours, is get that person speaking, because if not, and I think of that, it literally grows, and then you become more prone to depression and other mental health issues.
He never really talked about it. He clammed up, my little brother. And my older brother, through all the years, we've been trying to get him to go and see a mental health expert, and he was never, no, there's nothing wrong with me, kind of thing. And so for each of us, it you know, how we coped and how it affected us. was different, you know, and I think it has to do with how they experienced the shock of it. You know, for me, I was 50 miles away. My mom called crying. Early one morning, I was just up getting ready to go to work, and she's like, Starla, just come. I'm like, Ma, what happened? She's like, just come, you have to come now. I said, but what happened? And she said, it's your dad, you just have to come. I said, what happened to what? And like, she refused to tell me. He said, just come. So I drove so fast. It was scary because all I'm thinking, okay, so when I asked her what happened, he said he had an accident. That's what she told me.
Yeah, that's the word that people like to use.
And 22 years ago, the stigma was so much more. I mean, we still have so much now, but I just keep thinking, wow, that must have, even saying the word would have been immense.
But for me, I was driving and all kinds of things are going through my head, but never, ever did it cross my mind that he killed himself. Never. I thought we lived in a 2-story house. I said, oh my God, he probably fell down the stairs or, you know, something like that, you know, and all I kept thinking, was he okay? Was he okay? You know?
Well, I want to add something that you said, because I remember being first going into psychology, and in my mind, somebody who had depression was in bed all day, couldn't get up, couldn't wash their hair, just not functional. And that is for some people the reality, but oftentimes we're here walking about doing our thing. And so you may not know exactly what it is that's happening. And so, you know, the guilt is, there are two parts, that rational part that I'm sure you all must say, well, the truth is, hindsight is always easier, retrospect we're talking about. And then, you know, we're busy building lives. So if the person isn't giving very obvious signs or sharing, then, you know, we miss these things. But the emotional part is, I should have missed it, how could I miss it, you know? But the truth is, oftentimes, those who, even with mood disorders, you talked about dysthymia, which is a type of depression, you know, it's not what we think, oh, just being in bed and can't move. We're functioning, we're doing things, but
he was highly functional.
I mean, you know, he was, you know, you're a doctor, he was winning awards, he was doing all of that. And I find it, the pressure of being in the medical field, I see even as a counselor, people seem to think that I have this perfect life and I get everything right. And I'm like, no, that's not the case. I'm a human being before I am anything else. And so, you know, you're winning awards, you're a doctor, there's this there's this expectation of, well, you should this and you should that. So
I mean, there's almost this expectation that because you're a doctor, you should be happy. That's something that has been like you have this perfect life. And I was like, that the part of being a doctor that actually makes me happy is helping other people. You know, that's why I'm in public care. That's why I do public medicine. I was trained in a public health care system. So it's not about money, but you are still a person. And we see so much more. I spent a lot of time in oncology. And so I always tell people, you know, I know death very well from almost every perspective. I can see there's something that is now coined. It's something that I honestly thought I came up with, but I've heard other people use it. The case of actively dying. I can recognize when somebody is actively dying. And that's almost that in itself is a traumatic experience, because it should be my job to save people, but it is now so far out of my hands that I can't. And that's something that I faced in oncology. But what it results to for me is a level of inadequacy that is hard to overcome. And as much as I love helping people and as much as I love being a doctor, whenever you lose somebody, whenever you have a poor outcome, it's one thing to deal with the criticism from outside, the family that says, you should have done more, you could have done more. To deal with the criticism that comes from inside, what could I have done more? And I know that's one of your other questions, unfortunately. That to me,
that's okay. You're a doctor. You can jump the gun.
To me, that to me has actually been one of my triggers and one of the things that has been so difficult to deal with that comes from my professional life. My personal life is something almost completely different. You know, I always tell people Shanika and Dr. Arnold are three different people because I've learned so much to compartmentalize, but each different part of my life comes with its own difficulties, and that's one of the things for being a doctor, and I feel it a lot too with my other colleagues. As doctors in itself, we often have imposter syndrome because we never feel that we are enough when we have any sort of bad outcome.
And the suicide rate for professional in the medical field is pretty high as well, right? Because it's so taxing. It's, you know, the demands and the stress of that. And I mean, I couldn't imagine having to deal with death so often like that, you know, what that does. Yeah.
And one of the things that I also wanted to touch on that you both kind of alluded to is when you're in that moment, added to it, you know, at least for me, and I would like to know more about your experience, there's an added guilt of feeling like, man, I have all of these opportunities, I have all of these things going for me, I should be happy. I shouldn't be depressed, I shouldn't be struggling. And then there's this additional level of like self-inflicted judgment and internal like self-talk that goes on.
Yeah, that's it. Also, definitely something that that I've struggled with, because it's like people who eventually find out, and the hardest part for me is people within my own family who's like, but you're pretty, you have a good job, you know, you can afford XYZ, but material things, when you get to this point, you realize it helps nothing. It serves no purpose. It's just material things that when you leave this earth, you won't have anyway, so it doesn't matter. But it's like, oh, you have so much, you're so great, but it's like inside to attempt to describe the feeling, because it's not even, for me, it's not even a feeling of sadness. It's more a feeling of like I'm devoid of any feeling whatsoever. It's just complete emptiness. And it's not even that I should be able to enjoy this achievement. It's that I now have to pretend to enjoy this achievement because I don't want other people to think something is wrong with me.
Right.
Which means that something has to be wrong with me.
Yeah.
But the part of that I think is really also like especially powerful, you know, potential for like potential viewers as well, is depression could happen to anybody.
Right.
Thank you.
You
for
know,
saying that.
like depression doesn't have like a certain archetype or a certain prototypical type of person, or it's not
people on the street.
Yeah, it's not for
Everybody.
a certain class. It's not for a certain gender. It's not for a certain age. It really doesn't discriminate.
And can I say quickly, it doesn't mean weakness either.
No.
And I really want to touch this really quickly because
Thank you for saying that.
it's not weakness, because one of the things that the notions that I was talking about earlier is about, you know, the person, the suicide attempter, the person that dies by suicide being selfish or a coward. 100% the opposite.
Thank you.
That is a moment of desperation. You are at a cliff. Tell me how much people can jump off of the cliff. Not everybody have the gall to do it.
Exactly. So that attempt thing that you said in the beginning, it's true. You know what it is. Again, it's that dilemma. You're in such pain and despair, whether it's from a lack of feeling or just endless. What's despair? You know, it's still very often this sort of yes, no. Then you do. You know, I think when a person gets to that point and people go, man, I never think about their children. Their kids probably kept them alive that long. And then they got to that point, you know, there where even that was just this. And then what also happens is oftentimes people with that type of whatever, you know, if you have a mood disorder, that's one of the risk factors for suicide. Most people who have depression won't commit suicide, but the point is it is a risk factor. And so, you know, again, it goes back to having the information and understanding what it can do. And this idea of weakness, I mean, I know, like, that pisses me off, because we struggle in life without having any sort of mental disorder or anything, just normally life is hard.
Yeah.
Then you add that, whether it's an episode or it is going to be a disorder for the rest of your life, and somehow you're weaker, that makes no sense. You would know what it is to get up, deal with life, and then put any physical or mental illness on top. And that actually forces you to be stronger. You have to be, because every day now becomes an even bigger task.
Right.
So for me, like, I'm holding back my language because it's such bullshit with the weak thing.
We're on Taboo Talks. You can use the language.
So old. The weak.
Sound like you're encouraging it.
Yes, go ahead. Use the language.
So
We're
I
here
am
for
glad
it.
you brought that up, because it's bullshit. It's bullshit.
Yeah.
If, you know, like, walk in my shoes for a day to
Yeah.
really understand, you know, what that's like and what leads people to get to a point where their only option, and they feel like, you know what, I'm doing my family a favor. I am such a burden, and I'm so worthless and so unlovable that they're convinced that their lives of their children and family will better once they're gone. And so that, you know, again, is a part of getting to that point.
My mom literally said that, like, when I would ask her, because I had some days before, you know, I had those weeks leading up, she would say, it's better if I'm not here. Like, you don't understand, it's better.
Yeah.
And it's this irrationality that just low-key just takes over
But
the
you
person.
genuinely believe that in
Right.
that moment. And you like, it's almost impossible to be convinced otherwise.
Yeah,
Wow.
for sure.
It takes courage to be able to feel those feelings and get help.
And to talk about it.
Because I went through, I guess how I coped, I was running. I ran from it.
Oh, me too, baby.
I ran.
Run far. Run way
I
across
got-
the continent.
Within months, I got married. I went off to grad school. I ran, but it caught up. It caught up.
always
And
catches up.
when it did, I went through a period of depression. And so much so that I was the type I didn't want to get out of bed. But I had to get to class.
Yeah.
And there was that period where, to some extent, I could relate. There was that void and like the joy in doing certain things. You were just doing it because you had to, right?
Yeah.
But I went and I got help. I went and I saw a psychiatrist and he put me on medication. And this is something that I've never really shared openly before. But it's okay. It's fine. We sometimes we do need medication to stabilize. Sometimes we do need somebody else to talk to. We need experts to help us sometimes. We need the love and support of family. And I think all of those things were what, you know, helped me to bounce back. And thank God, 20-something years later, I've never had to struggle with depression, you know, the way I did when I was grieving in you know, those earlier years. But it takes courage.
Yeah,
and
for
that's what
sure.
I try to tell people, you know, never be afraid to reach out to somebody. Never be afraid to let somebody know, but that's sometimes the hardest thing.
I have a 16-year-old, and before I came here today, I tell her this often, and I told her, Kent, I said, I'm going on the show and we're going to talk about suicide, and I just want you to know, probably going to kill me for even saying her name, but I was like, babe, remember, if ever at any point in your life, because I know as her mom, there are things she not tell me, I get that, but if, and there is nothing in this world more important than you and your brother. There's no job that's more important, even if I seem busy. Nothing is more important than you being alive and us dealing with that. So whatever, and she's like, okay, mom, probably rolling her eyes because I say this often, but I want her, and when the little one is a little bit older, to understand that for me, I want to have that conversation, and I'll probably then run and ball and whatever else, but let's deal with it. Let's talk about it. When is the third leading cause of death from 15 to 24? Imagine that's what young people are choosing to do. Then we have to talk about it.
That takes me to the talk of destructive behaviors and self-harm. And I know you having borderline, that's one of the characteristics, right?
Yes.
So can we talk about like what our destructive, because we all have destructive behaviors, first of all. Like, let's not, like, even...
No me.
No, you?
I'm a counselor. That's those things.
You know what I mean? We all
Fully sane.
we all, you know, wake up in the morning and we go, I have to go to the gym, I have to do this and that, but like, man, I was asleep, or man, I know sending that, you know, script that has a deadline, you know, we all have self-destructive behaviors, but then there's clinical, you know, self-destructive or bodily harm. What's your experience with self-harm?
So my self-harm has actually been, it has changed over time as my understanding of my diagnosis has evolved. So from as far back as I can remember, I used to cut. But the thing with my cutting is that me sitting here, you will never even imagine that, because one, it's in locations that most people won't ever see, and it's just deep enough that it heals with near no scar. And the thing with cutting for me is that it was more of a cathartic type of thing, in that it translated what was deep emotional distress. I don't even want to call it pain, because some people don't understand emotional pain as being physical.
Yeah, but it is.
And it can be very physical when you really get into that deep emotional grief. But what cutting did for me, and you know, this is something that I hate talking about because of that perception that, oh, if you talk about this, then it's going to put an idea in somebody else's head, and I definitely don't want to encourage this behavior. But it translated that very deep emotional distress to a physical pain that is actually so much easier to cope with, because it lasts for a finite amount of time. You know when it's going to stop.
You make it tangible.
Right? It
You
makes
can see
it, you can physically see where the pain is coming from, rather than just this deep feeling of tragedy that you can't even pinpoint, that you can't understand. And after I kind of, for the most part, had gone over it, and why I haven't lost a desire to cut, but what made it so much more dangerous for it to be a coping mechanism for me is that in medicine, I have a bachelor's in medicine and a bachelor's in surgery. I cut as part of my job to help other people, but I've learned surgical techniques that can actually be very dangerous. I mean, there's something as easy as I can inject a local anesthetic and cut down to a major blood vessel, and one snip and I am done.
Yeah. So
right?
you know exactly
I would
what
have,
to do if you want to do it.
if I wanted to. And so that makes cutting very dangerous for me at this point in time, because can I really fight that urge to stop? And I can't trust myself anymore, or at the point that I was at my lowest, especially after a significant loss, that I did not believe that I could trust myself enough to stop if I tried. And so that is where I forced myself to cease my cutting, but then it translated into other behaviors. So alcohol use, which again is something I'd have to force myself to stop, because then I can't be cloudy, I can't be foggy at work, I can't be under the influence, I can't have my breath smell of alcohol. And so it became then the use of sex to cope. And that kind of translated to my last relationship, where every problem we had, every issue we solved with sex. I mean, sex was 3-4 times a day sex, because it was trying to cope and trying to almost numb that the feelings of pain and emptiness. And then it translated into driving fast. Risky driving behavior is one thing that I've had to fight doing. I lived in Jamaica and I studied in Jamaica, and Jamaicans drive bad to begin with. I had a little fast car that, I mean, I would get a drive that takes some people 30 minutes, I do in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Just because the adrenaline helps me to cope with stuff. And that's something that here, mainly because of the road surface, I've been forced to stop. And then my car had, I don't have my personal vehicle right now that is also a race car. And so that has, in dealing, in recognizing these things, has forced me to stop. So now I won't even go beyond the speed limit. Like, people would have to go around me because of how much I force myself to not drive fast.
Thank you. How about you? What about your destructive, drink your water, but what about your destructive tendencies?
One of the worst things for me, I never started cutting or anything like that. But one of the things that I initially thought was kind of like just like an angry type of outburst type of like behavior, but I later realized like it could definitely be classified as self-harm. I used to punch walls a lot. And not even like in arguments or like domestic disputes or anything like that, just me by myself in my room, overwhelmed by things, just would like punch on a concrete wall. And then for like days, sometimes weeks afterwards, like my hands are swollen and everything. And it was crazy because as a musician, these are like my livelihood and like one of my best and most important assets. So it was almost kind of like, in that moment, losing control to the point of self-sabotage, you know?
Like you almost wanted to make it not be that you get these awards.
Yeah, because again, you know, like you mentioned before, the imposter syndrome, and feeling as if I didn't, like I would be found out eventually anyways because I was a fraud, I was a phony. So I would be found out anyways. So maybe if I just take away my ability to do these things, then that will save me from getting to that point, you know? But I will share the fact that there was one instance when it was a tumultuous relationship to begin with, but we were having a disagreement, and we were probably like this distance apart, and I got upset and I turned and I punched the wall that was here. And now the thing about me, like I've never ever like even come close to any kind of like physical abuse or anything like that in any of my relationships. But after I did that in front of this person, and then I saw the look of fear in their eyes, I was like, okay, this is something that can never happen again. And then even for my own sake, afterwards I realized, okay, for my sake, this also can't ever happen again as well, you know?
I mean, I think about and we go back to the general stigma that's, you know, around mental health, you know, issues. And we go back to like, oh, well, people that exhibit self-harm or that have attempts, they are attention seeking. I want to really, really go as far as to say, I don't know if it's attention seeking in the sense that you want the spotlight on you, more of it's a expression of what is happening within you, right? So it's a expression in this outwardly reality of what's happening in my inner reality, right?
Cry for help.
Right.
So in that way, you can be for that. And,
And one of the things that I've kind of like really fully realized just from having this conversation is almost like trauma and pain and all of these things it's almost like, you know, I have a background in physics, so I kind of use that as, it's almost as if these things adhere to the law of conservation of energy, you know, where energy can't be created or destroyed, it just changes forms. And like I've always been of the opinion that pain and trauma and all of these things, if left unchecked, if left untreated, will always
manifest,
will always propagate, will always pass on. And it happens all the time, like within our interpersonal relationships. Like how many times we get into disagreements with people that have nothing to do with that person, where either I'd project my pain and my trauma onto you, you'd project your pain and trauma onto me, and they're just unresolved things. And then in an even grander expression of that, you know, when I listen to both of you talk about the pain that you had to experience from the loss of your loved ones, it feels like an even grander expression of that trauma and that hurt and that pain not disappearing but being passed on, you know, through that action.
Yeah, for sure. That's why I said it's something that I, like we were talking about, you know, well, you know, my mother was the one that committed suicide, but it still happened to me, you know, it still happened to you and your family, it still happened to, you know, all of the loved ones. There's a residual effect, you know, a ripple effect. And as a professional, I want to ask Martine, what advice would you give the ordinary person, you know, having to deal with either somebody that, you know, is exhibiting self-harm or self-destructive behavior, or someone that's grieving the loss of, you know, a loved one by suicide?
Yeah. So I think the first question is sort of signs and symptoms, what to look out for.
Yeah.
And I think there are a couple things, any big changes, you know, I mean, sometimes you might not immediately notice, oh, somebody's eating less.
Yeah.
But if over time you notice a person is either eating way more or way less, or you notice just the mood swings, you know, are not, again, it's not a bad day. Or, oh, this was a rough week, you know, something to go on this week. No, this is continuing, you know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. You want to, you know, so not eating at all, eating too much, not sleeping. If the person, you know, is speaking really fast or starts, you know, the speech is slowing down a bit. If the person has a prior suicide attempt, then that's also something that makes it a little bit easier in the sense that you are already aware and sort of on alert. So that is also one. If there's a history of depression or suicide in the family, that's also something as well. And if the person is experiencing, you know, one of the mood disorders, depression, bipolar, any schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder as well, you know, those are some of the things. But I think in just going about life, look for any changes in mood that are happening over a couple weeks or even 2 weeks. You know, and this is where for like teenagers it's hard because the period tends to be a moody period. So we tend to go,
he's just being a teenager.
Yeah, exactly. You know, but look,
Yeah.
exactly. So look for frequency, look for how long it's happening, you know. So I just want to go over that again. Changes in appetite, changes in sleep patterns, and isolating themselves, right? And I won't go nowhere, and I won't see nobody. I lock up on the phone, can't keep still. Just, you know, that's because like you talked about earlier, it could be everybody's different. So can't keep still, the speech is really fast. Those are things. Talking, as some people will talk about it, well, I just don't want to be here no more. This is too much for me, I can't take this. You know what, I just want to kill myself. If someone says that, take it seriously. Ask the question, hey, are you having thoughts or feelings about suicide? Just like that, you know, ask that question. And even if you not fully understand it, understand that it's very real and that young people and you know, many people are choosing to take their lives. And so this is not that we can ignore it. So ask the question, you know, and so I think those are anything. And then the other thing that happens sometimes when someone is, you might see their mood change in that they're happy, they're getting their land papers ready or their money papers ready, or then they put all the pictures in order, because at some point, sometimes when someone has decided, okay, I'm going to do this, there is a lightness that comes or a relief that comes from, okay, my suffering or the suffering I'm causing others will soon. So if somebody don't have any reason to be getting their estate and their lives in order, and then all of a sudden they do it and they seem to be a little bit lighter than usual, that's also something you want to look out for as well. Substance abuse, guys, I want to say that. Substance abuse is also a predictor of suicide, you know, and so that's something as well. If there's increased drug use of any kind, of the many prescription or not prescription, That's also something. Any impulsivity, dangerous behaviors, almost trying to get in trouble or trying to hurt themselves would also be something to look out for. But ask the question. And even if the answer is no in the beginning, are you crazy or what? Keep looking and just keep observing. And that's maybe when you call someone and you ask for help. And I want to say to the people maybe who have reached out to somebody before and didn't get the support you wanted, that's okay. There are other people who do understand or who get it to some extent and are there, So don't let one experience with somebody who couldn't support you determine that, you're not going to get help.
Yeah, I want to say not be shame. Like,
no.
Not be shame. I don't know. I want to, again, reiterate how important it is to really just talk about it. I was super fortunate, and I want to say fortunate, ironically, in my circumstance, because the people that came out of the woodwork, and I want to say it's because like of the person my mother was or the person that they think that I am. Martine especially, actually, Martine was basically my trauma therapist. Like the support that I experienced because of who my mother and I guess my father was overwhelming to the point where like I like really and truly shut off from, like I didn't even like leave me alone. Like all I wanted was like silence because I felt like I couldn't properly process, no? But if there are any, words of encouragement that I want to tell anybody that's facing anything of the sort, it's even if it's openly admitting it to yourself, whether you talk to yourself in a mirror, you're journaling, or just if you really feel that you have a problem, say that you have, name it, name the demon, and you can, help yourself.
Can I ask
exercise
a question? 'Cause I'm with you there. Speak to someone, ask someone. I mean, even if you walk into a hospital and go, ask one of the doctors, look your doc, this is what I go on, help me. And there are people there, professionals there. If you can't find a counselor or whatever, go somewhere and find someone. I've been wanting to ask this question though. What would you all have been comfortable with when this happened to you all? What would have been okay for someone to say? Or what are the looks? What looks would be okay?
Yeah.
I'm interested to know.
I've thought about this a lot. You want to go? I've thought of this so much because I kept feeling like, my gosh, like nobody understands. Like, you know what I mean? I kept feeling like, in any case, you're traumatizing me more, because it was so, the first thing that they think is they think that you're going to do it too. And I have an idea and I have a personal belief when it comes to my mortality. Like, I'm not the type of person that wants to live a long, fruitful life with children and grandchildren. I do, like, by the time I'm 60, I hope I am not here. Like, and and I say that to people and they think that I'm, no man, how you say that? No, like, it's just my life projection. I do not, like, this is what I want for myself. Like, I do not want to be here past a certain age because I have plans. And once I accomplish those, I know that my terrestrial existence has come to an end. And I'm very okay with that. And that's an uncomfortable thing to talk about, right? But what the question that you're asking is, how do you really deal with it? And I really and truly just, in that moment, I never need anybody to talk. I never need anybody to ask me a question. I never need anything, either just sit down there and if I want to, listen. Not ask me no question. Not say she's in a better place. Not say your mom was such a great person, don't worry, she's not going to go to hell. Not say, you know what I mean? Don't say stupid things because you don't know. Like, you don't know. No matter if you yourself have gone through the situation, my experience is completely different from yours. Don't project, especially in a space, a traumatic space, a freshly traumatic space. Don't project yourself onto me because I don't have, like, I'm already holding all of this weight. Like, I don't have the capacity. So for me, it's be there, You know, if somebody,
Not so much. Yeah.
just be physically there. Even if it's a little annoying,
Yeah.
be physically there, right?
Yeah.
And listen. That's it.
Yeah.
Not ask me anything other than that.
You know, from speaking from the other side of it, I can say that that also does help so much in that I don't want to hear anyone say, you know, if you kill yourself, who's going to feed your dogs? That's one of the ones that I have gotten.
Wow.
That that has
That's not a bad joke. Dark humor, you know.
that is one that has absolutely killed me, because using that guilt of you love your dog so much, how can you abandon them?
Yeah.
Right? It again, all that reinforces to me is you are not good enough. You are not, how can you do this to
Handling your
other people?
business,
You are
you know,
not, you know,
yeah.
you're not taking care of yourself. And, or, you know, what about your siblings? What about you? You have so much to live for. Like, none of those statements help. What really helps is literally just physically being there and sitting and allowing me to sit with it and sitting with me. Even in, I mean, you guys have known just from the media, the last probably 4 or 5 months of my life have been the most difficult months of my life. And I thank God every day for this friend that I have. Like, I would literally drive over to her house and just sit on her couch. And she does nails, she has her 2-year-old, and I just can physically sit there. And no conversation, no, do you want this, do you want water, do you want it? No, I don't need any of that. I just need to physically be in this space with another human being so that I don't feel the oppressing loneliness that I do on any other day of the week.
Does it help if, what are the things we encourage? Because is that sense of being there and the simple question, how can I support you? And just as, you know, if you feel, okay, I want to say something, then it's sort of like, how can I support you? Don't, if we make the assumptions and we mean well, but it might not be helping, right? Because what you both described is just having someone there.
Yeah.
And that's something that I wanted to add to what you were saying before, which is if someone does choose to reach out to you for support, if someone does reach out to you to say, hey, I'm not doing okay, or hey, I'm feeling XYZ, I think that perhaps the most important thing that you can do in that moment is to listen without judgment.
Yeah.
Because the last thing we need in that moment
Don't do that, right?
is,
Don't do that.
yeah, we've
So
been
well.
judging ourselves.
Enough for the
The
both of us.
perfection, right? You know that.
There's
That's so
absolutely
true.
no judgment you could throw at me that I haven't
Don't do.
already
So
been
true.
doing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so I think that, and I think I encourage it even in our regular conversations and stuff. You know, like I'm the type of person where, like, if one of my friends reaches out to me and they have something that they want to talk about, the first thing I ask them is, what do you need right now? Do you need me? Do you want advice? Do you just want me to listen? Do you just want me to empathize? Do you just need to vent? Do you just need to unload? What do you need from me right now?
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to just defaulting to fix it, you know,
Yeah.
trying to fix the situation.
I
Yeah.
think for me, like over the years, initially I was like that. I wish nobody would even look at me
Yeah.
or ask me or give condolences or anything. But I guess, you know, so much time has passed. I've learned, and I didn't realize this. I knew it before, but to the extent to which my dad impacted other people.
Yeah.
He was known as this gentle giant, and he was so loved in the community. And I think I've learned to understand that people reaching out to, by them reaching out and maybe some of the things they would say is because they were hurt as well. This hurt them. I didn't realize how much his death and how it happened hurt them as well. You know, so over the years I've just grown to however they choose to, because you're right, sometimes they don't know what to say or how to say it, but they feel compelled to
Yeah.
say something. And so, you know, I don't judge them either. I've learned not to judge. And I think reacting sometimes to initially to, you know, being offended or, you know, why would they say that kind of thing, you know, I was protecting myself because I didn't want to deal with it or touch it, but you know, you learn
Yeah.
to cope with it, and I've learned to empathize with people more, and I've learned to appreciate the fact that this didn't, yes, it affected our immediate family, but it affected the Belmopan community
Right.
in so many ways. Because like I said, a few months ago, earlier this year, somebody who, when he was younger, he knew my dad because he used to do business with his dad used to do business with my dad. And so he remembers my father, and he literally was sad
Yeah.
in saying what he said, and this is so many years after.
Yeah.
You know, and in a way, I felt a warmth in that regard, that, you know, he did touch so
Yeah.
many people, and it affected so many people.
And I think that's where you see, when you ask to what's your healing process like, that's what that process looks like. Recognizing that this maybe didn't just affect you, like you're not alone in your trauma. Everybody experiences
Yes.
trauma. But let me hold you right there, ma'am. Let's take a pause right here and go for a final commercial break because we have to pay bills. Stay tuned.
If you or someone you know is struggling with suicidal thoughts, please call 227-5354 or 911.
Welcome back to Taboo Talks. I am Drea Renault. I want to thank you guys so very, very, very much for being here today. It is really not an easy feat to openly express your traumas, your mental health issues, your, self-destructive behaviors or tendencies. It's not an easy thing to be open about it, but I am 100% grateful for you all to be here today.
And thank you too for sharing.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. You might make me finally cry. But we really had to have this talk because it would be, easy to say that it's deeply felt. It's more than deeply felt. This is the reality for a lot of people. A lot of people live in states of despair, in states of anhedonia, in states of, depression. It's not something that is, for a group of people or, like we were talking about, it's not something limited to. It's everybody experiences some type of mental health issue, or where it be an episode.
4 bouts of depression in a lifetime. Every human, more or less. And that's outside of having, something chronic, but at least 4 bouts of depression.
At least 4. That makes a lot of sense. I think I did on 5. But it takes a lot of, courage and strength to speak on something so personal. That is why we as a society should work at becoming more open-minded and welcoming to those fighting mental health struggles. You never know that what somebody might be struggling with. It could be your brother, your sister, your friend, your coworker. It could be you, and you are not, admitting it to yourself, basically. So let's treat it with the understanding and compassion that it not only deserves, but it definitely needs. So before we go, I would like to ask you all to, share whatever you want as a final thought to our viewers. And I can start over here with Starla because I started with you. You're the star.
So I think that I want to speak more to the families, the survivors. There are others who can relate to some of what you're going through. Connect with somebody. I'm here. I'm available to support anybody who would like somebody to just listen, and who can relate to losing someone by suicide. It's not easy. So I just that's my nugget to the families. Just, you're not alone, right?
Yeah. How about you?
I just want to add also to the people surrounding those with mental illness. You know, you are so important to us, but not necessarily in what you do or what you say, but just physically being there. So if somebody with a mental illness or with suicide ideations reaches out to you, leave the judgment on at the door and just physically be there, because you don't know, you know, your presence alone could save somebody's life.
That's so important.
Yeah.
And I just want to add, for anyone who is going through it right now, for anyone who is there right now, I just want to offer, I know hope is like one of the most difficult things to find in that moment, but there is hope. You know, it can get better, but it takes work, and it takes consistency, and it takes being absolutely and totally committed to your own well-being and figuring out what works for you outside of you know, traditional talk therapy, which can be extremely effective if you find the right therapist that you have that rapport with. You know, in addition to meds and stuff, there are other homeopathic, other things that you could incorporate into your daily life. Exercise, mindfulness meditation, journaling, grounding, being in nature, all of these different things that can help, but the difficult part is you have to stick with it long enough to know if it works. And you have to be consistent with it, and it can get better, I promise.
Yeah, that's beautiful. How about you, Martine?
I think two things. Highly treatable, as you said, there's a lot of hope. There is, but finding someone that you trust, or even better, more than one person that you trust, is going to be a huge part of that. And so reach out for help. And if you've been turned down before, or you know, you haven't gotten the encouragement you wanted, try again. There are a lot of us who are there and want to help. And for those who want, if there's a doubt, ask.
Yeah.
Are you gonna feel uncomfortable? Hell yes. Are you gonna wanna cry? Are you gonna be nervous? Might the person be angry at you? Oh my God, you think I'd ever do that? Make them vex. It's better to have asked the question and even come back and ask the question again to have never asked the question, and I'm sure you all would attest to that.
Right.
So those would be my two nuggets, as you said.
Yeah.
And you know, you're not alone. That's the truth.
Yeah. You really are not alone.
Yeah.
And that's something that sometimes we might struggle with, you know, rationally, you know, thinking and remembering that we are not alone in our struggle. So thank you again, guys. For those, thank you. For those of you watching on CBTV and on Facebook, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope that tonight's discussion sparks deeper conversation and a better appreciation for our out-of-the-box topics. With that, we're signing off for tonight and for this season. As much as you've laughed and snarked, we also are hopeful that you've taken note to understand that your perspective is only one of many. In the famous words of En Vogue, free your mind and the rest will follow. Yeah. Be colorblind, don't be so shallow. Continue to follow us on Colorblind's FB page and tune in on CBTV for more great content. It was a pleasure. Take care. Buenas noches. Namaste.
Taboo Talks is sponsored by Venatopia, Landshark Hard Seltzer, Design Depot, and Travelers Liquors.